So I was operated on, and I had an ulcer about the size of a silver dollar, and it took 18 pints of blood to keep me alive. And the doctor said, when they were discharging me, he said, "I don't know what you do for a living, but," he said, "I'll tell you right now, you better do something else." So I went back to because I was in the steamfitters local then, so I went back to the business agent, and I told him that the doctor had told me that I shouldn't go back to refrigeration, that it would do a lot more harm than good. So he said, "Okay," he said, "you can go with the steam fitters." So I went with the steam fitters, and I worked with a welder most of the time. Yeah, and I mean, I loved it. I had a great time. I mean, I was always ready to go to work. I worked with some of the nicest people I ever met in my life. So I always liked to go to work. But then there was a downturn in construction. So what are you going to do? Well, the business agent went down to London and talked to the people at Electric Boat. Oh, they said, "We can use all the steam fitters you can give us." So Electric Boat supplied a bus, and we got on the bus in back of the Catholic Church in Glastonbury, and the bus drove us down to Electric Boat, and we used to get there like 7 o'clock in the morning. And I always remember at Electric Boat, when you get out of work, you climb this hill. They called it Heartbreak Hill. I mean, it was a steep, steep hill. You had to climb that, and then you could walk to the parking lots. But they called that Heartbreak Hill. So I worked in a submarine for about a year, and I remember I installed the oxygen piping. In a submarine, they have like 99 men, 99 enlisted men, but they only have 33 bunks. So 3 men slept in the same bunk. And I installed the oxygen piping to go to those bunks. And I remember the Navy inspector looked at the job, and he said, "Well," he said, "I'll tell you, I've been inspecting oxygen systems for 21 years. And he said, "That's the neatest installation I've ever seen." Well, I did something right. And then work picked up back home, so we left Electric Boat. But that was quite an experience. And it's fascinating how the last thing they do, before the boat is built, they have the skeleton, the top and the bottom, and they mark the center of the boat. And inside the submarines, there are ribs that go by each other like that. So when they go down in the water, those ribs slide by each other. Then when they come up, the ribs come back out like that. So that was a fascinating experience. And then things picked up back in Hartford, so we came back to Hartford and worked. The first 15 years I was in the local, I mean, work was very good. But after that, it was real sketchy. I mean, you'd get to work for a month and a half or 2 months, and then you'd loaf for a month. And then there was a guy, Al Avalon, that lived in South Glastonbury, and I don't remember how I met him. But anyway, he put me to work at times when jobs were hard to come by. And I've never forgotten that. As a matter of fact, I have been meaning to send him a letter. But, and he had he was Italian, and he had a garden alongside of his house. He had bought 2 building lots in Glastonbury. They were right on the corner of a road. And he had a friend who had a chicken farm, and every spring he'd get a load of chicken manure from his friend with a chicken farm. And he'd get a pile of manure, you know, about as big as that table. Well, he'd mix that in his garden. And John, he had vegetables. Oh, you wouldn't believe the vegetables he had. And he used to have so much tomatoes that he used to fill a big wheelbarrow with tomatoes and put it out at the end of his driveway so all the neighbors could stop and pick up tomatoes. Yeah.
That's Avalon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alphonse Avalon.
So
yeah.
Was he the business manager, or?
Oh no. Oh no.
How did he get jobs?
He was a boss.
Oh, I see.
He was a boss, so he could hire people.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah. His father, he lived, when he was a kid, he lived in East Hartford in like a low-income area that flooded every year. And his father was a plasterer, and a whole bunch of plasterers lived there. And every year, the flood would come. They'd move all their furniture out and store it somewhere. Then when the water went down, they'd go in there and tear all the plaster out, replaster all the walls, and move back in. And they did that year after year. Yeah. Yeah. Then they finally built the dike, and that kept the water out.
Was Al Dean a steam fitter?
Well, Al Dean was a welder. Al Dean had a dance band. Yeah. And he had a dance band in this area. And he used to play at all the colleges in upstate New York. And I remember him saying that he used to pay the musicians $3 a night. Yeah. And so he was a saxophone player, and he blew out his lip, so he couldn't play anymore. So I don't know where he learned to weld, but I mean, he became a first-class welder. Yeah. And I spent a lot of time working with welders. I remember there was this one welder, Rip Collins, that was his name, and nobody wanted to work with him. They didn't like him, so they said, "Well, the hell with it. We'll put Howard with him." So I went to work for him, and I mean, we got along. He told me the same stories over and over and over, how the family had this land, and he had 2 sisters, and how he was trying to screw the sisters out of the best piece of land. He was going to get the piece of land that had the railroad track, and his sisters could have the rest of it. And I mean, he used to draw that on the floor and show me until I got sick of that. Then they brought the first black person into the local. And they said, well, we'll put him with Howard because he gets along with everybody. So this young black guy came into the local, and I said to him, now I'm going to give you some fatherly advice. You just listen to me and do what I tell you. No matter what anybody says to you, no matter what anybody says, you don't get into a fight. All you say is, time will tell. But you don't fight with anybody, because if you do, you're out. So he became one of the top welders in the local. Yeah, yeah. And I'll never forget, there was another welder working there, and he lived about 35 or 40 miles away. And you know, the state planted small trees on the side of the road on the banks. Well, he thought he'd stop and pick up a couple of trees. And the state police caught him. Oh, geez.
So
Yeah.
what did a steam fitter do? Would you get the pipes aligned and
Yeah,
in the right place and attached to the wall so the welder could weld
Yeah.
them together?
yeah, yeah.
What did you like about that job?
Huh?
Why did you like the work so much?
Well, first of all, I worked with a great bunch of people, and I loved building something. Yeah, yeah. I worked on high-rise buildings in Hartford, you know, that were 40 stories high. I saved a guy's life one day. You know, they had, the floors were open, but they had a cable all around the edge. And I'll never forget this guy, Eddie Earl. One of the cables was stretched out, and he reached for the cable, and I knew he wasn't going to catch it, so I grabbed him and pulled him back. And he said to me, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. But I enjoyed what I was doing. I remember I used to, working in Hartford, when I worked on a high-rise building, I used to get into Hartford at 7 o'clock in the morning before the traffic really started. I used to get a cup of coffee, and I'd get up and sit on the edge of the building and watch all the traffic coming in from everywhere. So I don't have to pay any union dues anymore. I'm a 50-year member. And it's funny, my best friend, Frank Barber, lived across the street from me. And I used to make the rounds of all the insurance companies every morning. And so one morning I got home, and I going over to his house, and I go over there, and he's still in bed. Well, he said, what do you think happened to me today? I said, I have no idea. He said, I got a job this morning at the Travelers Insurance Company. Yeah, well, he was there a half hour after I was, and he got the job. So it's another case of being in the right place at the right time.